With summer break just starting, school out, all the students, high school, college, younger, older, we are going to be able to get outside, enjoy that beautiful nature. No more need to just be at our computer playing video games the whole summer. Surely, with this beautiful weather, we'll get outside. Yeah, it seems pretty lame for a guy that just graduated college to have nothing better to do to start a summer than play Plants vs. Zombies. But come on, it's been over 12 years since the original Plants vs. Zombies first came out on computers. Since then, it was bought 2 years later by EA to be ported to consoles, handheld devices, and phones, as well as producing an additional 6 new games for the series dating all the way up to 2019. This classic tower defense game became the best-selling game for PopCap Games, surpassing both Peggle and Bejeweled, massive games in their own right. This societal giant this game became back in 2009 at its release cannot be overstated, as everyone is playing or talking about this game. With how fondly most of us think back to our experience with this game, myself included, I wanted to take a deep dive by completing the game to see quite how well it holds up over 12 years later. Before taking on this task, I remember playing this game, I remember my 10-year-old mind strategizing to defeat each wave of incoming zombies, but I didn't truly remember the scale of this game and all it had to offer. Is Plants vs. Zombies as good as we all remember? Let's find out together. So I figured the best way to go about reviewing this game in sort of a retrospective way is to kind of go through it as a normal player would. So we started with the campaign and going all the way through it. You start off the game like any ordinary homeowner would by planting a few plants that will protect you from the oncoming horde of zombies. And the game quickly introduces this idea that sun is your currency, which falls from the sky during the day. And you quickly find out that in order to keep this production of sun at its absolute highest, you're gonna have to plant some sunflowers. Honestly, much of World 1 is to kind of introduce the overall strategy of the game and sort of the repeating themes that you will see, where you have oncoming horde zombies that get boosted when there is a flag, because that is an extra horde of zombies coming in. And it's a lot of the same in World 1. It is a pretty boring world, nothing too hard. Keep in mind, this is a game that I played when I was little, and maybe this was a little more difficult, but for a full-grown adult, this is very easy stuff. Additionally, after each level in this world, you are introduced to a new plant or some new mechanic. So in the first couple levels, you get introduced to the sunflower, like I said previously, but you also get introduced to a shovel that allows you to remove your plants if you're not happy with what you've placed. But for the most part, you're just getting introduced to each possible new plant, and as you'll see, you're going to need a lot of them coming up in the future worlds. And just so you know, all this gameplay that you're seeing is indeed me playing the game. I played all the way through the whole thing once again, and you'll notice that I am quite a bit under the double row of sunflowers into just placing as many shooter plants as possible in front of them. If this is not your strategy, I don't know what you were doing growing up. This is obviously the most optimal way to play the game. You have pure sunflower impact as well as enough plants to protect you. But yeah, overall, World 1 of the campaign is a pretty uninteresting introduction to the game. If you've never played the game before, maybe it would be a little more interesting, but for a guy that has a little bit of background and remembrance of playing the game, it was definitely super easy and not a lot of very cool levels, because you'll see in the future worlds, the in-between levels can sometimes be very interesting, and most of the time, the last level of every world is something that's a little more difficult or unique to that world, but that's not necessarily true for this first one. And the thing is that it's just a normal lawn during the day, so you have the sunflowers dropping and a completely normal lawn to play with, and the opposing zombies aren't very interesting for the most part. You have a few unique ones like the bucket head that is a little more powerful, but for the most part, everything's pretty generic, just a general introduction to the game. Moving on to World 2, you get a lot of the same, obviously. I mean, this is a tower defense game. There's only so much you can do, but what's interesting here is that World 2 introduces that each world will have a very unique mechanic. So for World 2, it's the fact that you are no longer in the day, so you no longer get sun falling from the sky. You now have mushrooms as some of your new plants, as well as a new way to make sun. And for me personally, mushrooms are probably by far my favorite plants to use in the game, because they're just so economically viable and you can just place so many of them. They just feel so satisfying, as you'll see. So beyond the permanent plants that you place for both the economic sunflowers and the sun mushrooms, and the normal shooter plants you also have things like the walnut wall that helps protect your plants. It makes it a lot harder for the zombies to eat through it. And you also have some temporary things like the potato mine and the cherry bomb that will instantly kill any zombies that land on it or exploded by it, but they are of one-time temporary use, so you're not going to really want to fortify your whole lawn with these kinds of temporarily plants. Additionally, the night, while it doesn't have sun dropping from the sky, it also has these tombstones all placed around your lawn, which zombies can end up spawning from these during the incoming waves, but you do get introduced to a plant that can remove these for a cost, which I absolutely love. Additionally, this gives you money, which way down the line, money can be used outside of the actual gameplay of the campaign, but that's for a different time. World 2 also reintroduces and really stresses this idea that levels 5 or stages 5 and 10 in each world bring some sort of unique gameplay, and honestly World 2 is some of my favorite for this. So 2.5 is sort of this like whack-a-mole game that ends up being a mini game that you can play outside of the normal campaign, but it is a ton of fun and really makes you have to think about your APM kind of when you're playing it, which the normal tower defense mode really doesn't care about that so much. And then 2.10 is very interesting because it has this conveyor belt where you sort of have to set up your lawn. However, you get this conveyor belt of plants. You can readjust it later, and generally neither of these two levels are very hard, but I think they end up being a breath of fresh air after having a lot of monogamous gameplay going forward. Overall, I think World 2 might just be my favorite to play. While you don't get all of the plants introduced to you at this point, so you're missing out on some fun interactions, you get a lot of my favorite personal plants, especially the little mushroom. Absolutely adore that guy. And while night does have the extra difficulty of no sun falling, there's a lot to enjoy with it, and in the future worlds you're going to see some introduced mechanics that aren't my absolute favorite. Just personally, I don't think they're actually bad, they're just kind of annoying for me. So World 2 kind of is that simple tower defense gameplay that has enough added difficulty that you have to think a little bit, unlike World 1, but isn't so terribly hard that you're getting frustrated with it. I mean, Plants vs. Zombies, you're never really getting that frustrated, but there are points where you do have to think a little bit more than one might expect. World 3 is the first world that I don't particularly love the mechanic that they add. So the mechanic that they add in World 3 is that you have a lovely pool now in your lawn, because naturally it is the summer months and it gets a little hot, so we need to have a pool in our backyard now. Where this becomes sort of annoying is that you just have to spend this extra little bit of money to plant lily pads into the pool to place plants there, which isn't terribly annoying, but it's the fact that you only get a couple zombies in the pool, especially on the early levels. So you have to waste this extra money to place a couple extra plants to kill 1 or 2 zombies. And it's just a little bit of additional pain. I know it's just a new mechanic, and I know I'm just sounding a little weird to complain about it, but it's just annoying to do sometimes. In particular, for anyone that's played through Plants vs. Zombies recently and remembers the dolphin zombies, like, they're the absolute worst. Those guys are so freaking fast. If you don't have something pre-set up for them, they are just going to devastate your pool. But yeah, honestly, beyond this, the World 3 doesn't add a lot of new mechanics. You get some cool additional new plants to add to your repertoire. And something I forgot to mention previously, but for each individual level, you don't actually get access to every single plant that you've been introduced to. You have to select a few of them to bring into each level. So that's another reason why I don't particularly love the pool levels, because you're required to bring the lily pad, because otherwise they're just gonna run down the middle lanes and then you die, which is not great. So yeah, just having to add this extra lily pad and taking it away from other cool plants is sort of annoying for me. Something of note is that mushrooms are generally not able to be used during the day, so you are limited to just the day plants, which is also a bit tragic for me because I love using mushrooms. I will say that the triple shooter is probably one of my favorite additions for a plant, as I am all about that big sun economy, so being able to spend it all on something and having the highest value plant is really cool. But yeah, overall, World 3, not my absolute favorite, not necessarily bad for the game, but I wish I had access to my full repertoire of plants. I'm so sad that I can't use my mushrooms during it, and having to waste a spot on the lily pads can get really frustrating, but that's nothing new because World 4 will be much of the same. World 4 is essentially just a combinations of World 2 and World 3. I mean, they weren't all that creative with that, and it kind of wrote itself, you know, introduce back the mushroom plants, have the pool, boom bam, new world. With this in mind, however, since they needed to introduce another mechanic beyond this, they did introduce this fog, which ends up being kind of cool, but you can kind of just ignore it a lot of the time. They introduce a sunflower plant so you can actually see, which I generally prefer to use just because I like being able to see the whole board. I just think it looks a little bit nicer than the big huge cloud fog. But the reality of it is that you can just kind of play knowing that zombies are coming from that way, because there aren't enough unique types of zombies to actually really require you to know what kind of zombie's coming. So if you choose not to use the sun or the lamp, it's perfectly fine. So it ends up being a mechanic that you kind of can just ignore, which is a little bit tragic. I will say, in addition to me really disliking the dolphin zombie just because of how fast it is, this world introduces these flying balloon zombies, and it requires you to have either a cactus or a fan. And let me tell you, the fan is one of the dumbest possible plants possible. The first time I used it as a kid, I think I fell for the same thing, and the first time I used it now, I was like, wow, this fan is so broken, it's just gonna blow all them away. No, it's a one-time use. Don't get tripped up about it. It's not that broken. It's kind of bad. The cactuses are just far more consistent, so I don't even know why this fan exists. I guess if you're in a pinch you have to use it, but absolute bait. Absolute bait. This world does, however, introduce probably my favorite minigame in the bunch, which is this pot minigame where you break these pots and some of them end up having plants in them and then some of them have zombies, and you kind of just have to react to what you see. So most people probably when they're younger, I imagine, did the same thing as me, where you just sort of break all the plants and then just place everything as fast as possible and hope it works. I think it's the fun way to play it. It's definitely probably not the intended way. I think they imagined you're going to do it a little bit slower, but that's the fun speedrunner kind of mindset, to just break it all and then play it by ear. Overall, World 4 is one that I particularly like, probably my second favorite world overall, just because I really do love the night plants. All the mushrooms are absolutely great. The aesthetic of the night is pretty cool with the fog. It's, you know, not being able to know what's coming through it. Implementation of these new plants isn't the absolute best. Like, you have things like the hypno mushroom, which is only really good against things like the dancing or the disco zombie. You never really use it on anything else, which is perfectly fine, but I wish some of these had more uses than just having super niche one-time sort of uses. But up to this point, I'd say generally these 4 worlds are all very easy, and anyone, even without having any idea of how to play the game, would probably just place things and end up beating it. And that is all true until World 5. I genuinely think World 5 as a little kid was very difficult. Like, actually takes brain power. So let me talk about that now. So World 5 as a setting is completely different. We're no longer in our yard, front or back. We are now on the roof of the house, which, as this game intends it to be, the roof is slanted, meaning you need to have unique plants and a unique setup to allow for anything to work up here. So similar to needing lily pads on the pool, here you need these pots to house your plants because you're no longer just planting them into the ground, which flavor-wise is absolutely beautiful. If you're planting things near the back of the roof, there is a bit of a slant, meaning you need things that can catapult, where you get all these cabbages, which essentially act as just like your normal shooter plants, but basically you only use them on the roof. Additionally, you get a lot of other cool new plants added as the time goes. And the slant mechanic is actually really cool and is what a lot of the difficulty is, because you want to place your sunflowers in the back to have them protected still, but then you end up having to put cabbages all throughout the rest of the level, and the very front of it is technically flat enough where you could put anything up there, but you don't want to put stuff too far forward because then it can get attacked by zombies sooner. You know, a lot of strategizing goes into it. The overall difficulty of this whole world is also just kind of ramped up, in my opinion. They have these plants or these zombies that just come in and steal plants regardless, unless you have these other plants that can protect them. Some of the new special zombies are just overall way more powerful than any of the special zombies beforehand. So it takes a lot of general strategizing on where you want to place things. Mind you, you could probably get away with just placing things wherever and just hoping for the best. But if you want to go in with a flawless win, you do have to think a little bit more than normal. Where World 5 ends up being one of the best made worlds is in its final level and the boss level of the entire campaign. So I was surprised. I did not remember this from a kid, but there is being a boss essentially on the final level of the game. While most levels are only generally a couple minutes long, the boss level ends up actually taking quite a bit of time to complete. It's not really that hard. You do have to do a little bit of juggling back and forth, but it is a very well made level. The music on it is particularly enjoyable and I absolutely loved it. I will talk more about music in an upcoming section. This is just primarily for gameplay right now, but the boss level is fantastic and the enemy is flavorful for sure. A massive dude and a robot, what's not to love about that? And similar to previous specialty levels, you don't actually get to decide your setup of plants. I mean, you get to decide it once they come down this conveyor belt, but you are once again just sort of reacting to what you're given. But it is a fun level. I would say this is probably one of the most replayable levels just because you're constantly doing something. A lot of these other levels, once you're set up, you can kind of just sit back, check out your phone and not worry about it. But this level, you constantly have to be doing something. So that's definitely something I absolutely love. And for a final level in the campaign, it definitely fulfills everything I would want in a level. And I imagine that's true for a lot of people. And as a kid, knowing your opponent is a zombie in a zombie mech, like, that's crazy, man. They did not need to do that, and they did it anyway. But once you defeat him, that finishes the main level's campaign. Let me tell you, that is not even close to all of the content that this game has. I'll just dive into a little bit of what else this game has to offer, but let me say, if you want to actually 100% this game or beat everything it has to offer, you are willing to commit way more hours than I'm willing to commit. It is a lot of time, but I'll get into that in a second. For some of the bonus content, just to quickly run through them, I ended up not 100%ing beating all of them, but I have played and done most of them previously. First up, there are the mini games, which is probably the most diverse of the bunch, where you just get a whole bunch of different things. So the first couple of few you get is some botany, the walnut bowling and slot machine, which walnut bowling is probably one of the most fun mini games in the entire franchise. I'd even say it is just a ton of fun to do, but when you play through mini games, you begin to unlock more of them. In total, there are about 20 of them in this game. I think if you play different versions of Plant vs. Zombies, not just like the old PC version, there might be differing amounts. Don't quote me on that one. Next up is the puzzle mode, which you have the vase breaker, which was talked about previously, and then iZombie, both of which are very fun, and there are quite a few of those that you end up playing through. And lastly, you have the survival mode, which is a lot more like the initial game of the campaign, where you're setting up a plant wall to defeat these zombies. But something that differs is, since it's like a survival mode, you get to actually change what plants you have in response to what's going on in the game. Survival is definitely my least favorite of the bunch because it's kind of just more of the campaign, whereas both puzzle and minigame end up being completely different than the base game. And the other big piece of bonus content that comes after playing through the main campaign is the Zen Garden, which the Zen Garden is where a lot of your time sink would be if you want to end up 100% of the game, just because you end up having to wait quite a bit of time to get all the things you need to 100% it and actually grow your tree. But yeah, Zen Garden is not really much of gameplay, I'd say. It's not, if you're going to play this game, that's not something you're playing. That is solely for completionists. I will say the minigames and puzzles, absolute wonderful additions to the game. Definitely did not need to be done, but they introduce a lot of cool things for the game and how it could be played. Very unique to Plants vs. Zombies, something that a lot of other tower defenses do not have. While the normal tower defense mode is pretty similar to a lot of other games, The minigames and puzzles are very unique and make you think about the mechanics of the game in a different way, which I absolutely adored. A welcome addition for sure. My recommendation for people that have never played Plants vs. Zombies or maybe haven't played it in a very long time, go through, play the campaign, go through, play the minigames and puzzles, and you'll have an absolute blast. It is so much fun. It definitely still lives up to the expectations people had from their past. It's not just a game that was enjoyable because you were younger or there wasn't a lot of competition on the market. Plants vs. Zombies is just a good game, and there is a reason why it got so big. It's definitely worth revisiting. But now I'm going to just briefly talk about a few other things that I loved about the game. So for this final section of the video, since we are primarily just a video game channel, I'm not going to really get into an in-depth analysis of what Plants vs. Zombies is doing, because that's just not something that I have the background in doing. But as a person that loves to play video games, I'm just going to talk about a few of the other things that I think most gamers would notice about a game, such as like graphics, music, etc. And for this section of the video, the thing that's going to be running in the background is the credits of the game, which is a good segue into one of the things that is surprisingly amazing about this game, which is just the soundtrack of it. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, I've been playing the soundtrack throughout this video, and the theme, or the title screen theme, is something that just slaps. I mean, you can look it up on YouTube, and that thing has like millions of views because people just love it. It's insane how good it is for what it is. I mean, it didn't have to be as good as it is. And the thing that I'm playing here is this credit song, which this credit song just, I don't know, reminds me of like the Portal end song as well. And it's just, both of them are so good, and this is absolutely so insanely good for what it is. For a game that most people think of as like a mobile game that you just spend a little bit of time on and can enjoy in your side time, the soundtrack is so insanely good that I think it competes with a lot of games nowadays even. And that's absurd because I don't think this actually had many expectations when it was released to be as good as it was, and it definitely wasn't expected to take off as a franchise that really carried pop for a long time. I mean, this and Bejeweled were just like the two things that really kept it going. I think a lot of people remember the original Plants vs. Zombies fondly and haven't really bothered to replay it because, me included, there really isn't a reason to replay it. But I ended up really just having a great time and sitting down for a few hours and it just being so good, like the memories of just remembering how things went down. And unfortunately, I can't say the Plants vs. Zombies franchise really stayed as great as this game. I think a lot of people would hold the opinion that it definitely went downhill in a lot of capacities for what they were trying to do. I don't necessarily think that the game developers were greedy in any capacity. I mean, I know some people got really upset that the Plants vs. Zombies was just like ported like a bajillion times to a ton of different things, but like that just makes it more accessible, and yeah, you have to do that to make money, so I don't blame them for that. I do think in the future games, kind of going away from the whole tower defense was a little weird, predominantly just looking at like multiplayer things. I mean, that's just kind of where the gaming world as a whole sort of went, so I guess Plants vs. Zombies wanted to jump on that, but I think it could have really just stayed for this wholesome sort of experience. And it's a little unfortunate that it didn't last that way. I can't imagine making a game like Plants vs. Zombies in 2022 making a whole lot of sense. But as a person that revisited it in 2022, it was definitely a lot of fun still. And I'd highly recommend it to anyone that wants to play a game from their past. I mean, I'm a big fan of revisiting old games. I've constantly speedrun them in the past. I have a lot of friends that just like to play games from when they were a little kid, and I'm not that old, you know, I just graduated college, so this isn't something that's terribly in the past, but in the world of gaming, you know, you can only go so far back, so I like to revisit games on my N64 and play them. So I highly recommend to anyone, if not Plants vs. Zombies, to go look back at a game that you played when you were younger and see if it still holds up. I mean, people do this all the time with other forms of media, like movies from when they were younger, and often they're a little disappointed. But I think that's part of the fun, to realize how much we've grown as people, and it might not being the game's fault, you know? Like, even if the Plants vs. Zombies didn't live up to my expectations, it's not the game's fault. It's just that, like, I as a person have different expectations for a game. However, it did live up to my expectations, so it lived up to that standard. I know this end part has been a little bit rambly, but I think people should experience games and then re-experience them later in their lives to see if their view on the game has changed, either positively or negatively. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked sort of this tangenty retrospective video on a game, I plan to do more of them in the future. It's not necessarily a review of a game, because reviewing a game that is this old doesn't make a lot of sense. People have already said a lot about it, but sort of how it lives up to my standards and hopefully some of yours nowadays. I would love to hear if any of you guys end up replaying it or have played it recently. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us out. And I wish you guys a great rest of your day. Peace out, guys.